Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf Kuf Gimel. We are near the bottom of daf Kuf Bet Amud Bet. Let's catch us up and see exactly what we're up to. I'm going to share my screen and we will get started. So, go. So we are now a few days into the second chapter of Bava Metzia, and this chapter deals with what one must do when one finds a lost object. Our Mishnah mentioned that a bundle found in a public thoroughfare may be kept. And yesterday we saw the following debate about that situation. Rabbah says that even if the bundle has an identifying mark, it does not need to be returned because it's going to get trampled. And a sign that's going to be trampled, meaning some kind of indication, some kind of mark, distinguishing mark on an item that's going to get trampled and therefore eliminated, that doesn't count as a sign. We're just not going to treat that as a sign. It's not going to survive. And because it's not going to survive, you'll give up hope. You'll be miyayish it, and somebody who finds it can keep it. Rava, on the other hand, disagrees, and he says only if the bundle does not have an identifying mark does that small bundle not need to be returned, because even a sign that's going to be trampled counts as a sign. And so as a result, in our Mishnah, he understands our Mishnah to only be talking about a case where the bundle does not have an identifying mark on it. So we challenged Rava from our Mishnah and the next Mishnah, but Rava offered an alternative explanation to overcome the challenge. As I said, he basically said, we're going to say that those Mishnayot are dealing with where there is no sign on the bundle. And so now as we pick up near the end of the seventh line, and by the way, and why is it that when that bundle is in private property, it works? It's because even without a sign, you can use the location of the bundle as proof, as evidence that it belongs to you. And so as a result, even if there's no sign on it, if it's in private property as opposed to in the public thoroughfare, you would be able to say this belongs to me, and and somebody would be obligated to announce it, and they would have to announce that something was found in a particular location, and the loser of it, to the person who lost it, would need to say what it was that was lost, and he would need to identify the item, and that would be sufficient to recover the item. And so now, as we pick up,
is that consistent with his previous opinion regarding Avodah Shelo Kadat? Right? Well, the previous Mishnah.
Yeah.
Right.
Why stay more? Why would it not be consistent?
I'm just thinking that through for a moment.
Yeah, I mean, the point is that whether indeed, I don't think that you have to say one way or the other with respect to Yesh Shalom Midas in that regard, because we can assume that we're talking about a situation where the person knew that they had lost the item. So I don't think it has to I don't think that they necessarily have a bearing one on the other. The one that does is more relevant is going to be his statement with respect to is the location of a lost item considered a potential sign, and clearly he says yes. And so that's an important debate, that a secondary debate that he has with Rabbah, that is not necessarily connected to the question of whether or not a sign that's trampled counts as a sign, but it ends up being connected because of the Mishnayos that we have, that effectively the way he ends up explaining it is based on the concept of a mark of a location being considered a valid sign. So again, now we're going to, our first challenge was of Rava alone. Now we're going to challenge both Rabbah and Rava as we pick up with the Tashma that's on the seventh to last line on Kaf Bet Amud Bet. So Tashma, Kurichos Birishos Harabim Hare Elu Shalo. That when we talk about little bundles, we're talking about sheaves of small bundles of wheat. So birshus hayachid notel umachriz. No, not today. When you find those in a private domain, so then you need to announce it because somebody lost it. They probably know that they lost it in a private domain, and so you have to go and announce it. The alumos, but when it comes to alumos, and Rashi explains that alumos are omrim gedolim. That's large sheaves. So when it comes to large sheaves, then what's the story with that? Bein b'rshus harabim, bein b'rshus hayachid, noto machras. You have to announce them wherever you find them. So now we've got a problem because Rabba heikim the Rava heikim. How are either of them going to explain this? Because both of them, why can't the finder keep the large sheaves in public? According to Rabba, the finder should be able to keep the large sheaves in public because presumably they're going to be trampled, and so they should be able to be kept. And according to Rava, they should be able to be kept because they're large sheaves, and so as a result, he's the one who says that even if there's a sign on them, they should be able to be kept. So each one is going to, so Rabba Mataris L'Tamei B'Simin, Rabba Mataris L'Tamei B'Makom. That Rabba explains it according to his view based on the mark on the item, and Rabba explains it according to his view based on the location of the item. Rabba Mataris L'Tamei B'Simin, when it comes to the small things, that's where the finder gets to keep it, Demidrasa, because they get trampled. And Birshos Hayachid no Makras, but when it comes to them, the small ones in a private domain, Delo Midrasa, that they're not trampled. So as a result, that's why you have to announce it. Lumos, when it comes to large, Bain Birshos Harabim, Bain Birshos Hayachid, no Makras. When it comes to the large sheaves, it doesn't make a difference whether you're in public domain or private domain. No makras, you have to announce it. Why? Because Gavan de Gavin, de Gavian, because of their height, low midrasa. You're not going to trample it, right? If you have a car in Rishos Harabim, nobody's going to trample the car, but unless you really have a major stampede. But when you have like a bicycle in Rishos Harabim, then people could actually walk on it. So it depends on the size of the item and whether it's lying down or standing up in the connection with the bicycle. But the bottom line is that when you have smaller items, they can be trampled, but when you have larger items, they're not likely to be trampled. So that's how Rabbah can explain this brisa. So it's all consistent with Rabbah. And Rabbah can also do it. The Rabbah mataris l'tamei b'makom. He says that what we're talking about is the place. So krikos bershos harabim harei shalom. When it comes to the small bundles that they in the public domain, in the public thoroughfare, they are kept by the finder de minashtafa because they are nashtafa. So what is nashtafa? Top line in Rashi helps us out here. Misgalgil beragle adam. They get rolled in by getting kicked by the feet of people. Ubehema and animals. And you won't find these items. You won't find these smaller bundles. You won't find them in the place where they were dropped. And so as a result, there's no ability to use the place where it was lost as evidence. But when it comes to private domain, well, then they're not going to get kicked around because there aren't that many people there. So you're not going to they're not going to roll around. And so therefore you'll have to announce it. What about large sheaves? You have to announce the large sheaves. Why? Because they're heavy. They're not going to roll around, right? So again, if you take a look at Rashi helps us. End of the second line of Rashi, diyikari, kvedut. It's they're heavy. So we see that again. The second question, we have resolved. And so now we go on to a third question, a third challenge. Now, again, first challenge was
Wouldn't
of
they, I'm sorry, wouldn't they be if it's Reshut Yachid, it's private property. Wouldn't it be obvious that it belongs to the person who owns that property?
No. Specifically, we're talking about a situation where somebody lost something in somebody else's property, and it doesn't belong to the person who owns that property. If the person who owned the property, it wouldn't be lost. We're dealing with something that was lost. That's a absolute very, very important point. We're dealing with something that was lost, and so the situation is that the owner of the property is not the person who lost the item. If that were the case, it wouldn't, like I said, it wouldn't be a lost object. So okay, so now we challenge first Rava, then we challenge Rava and about Rava and Rabba. Now we go back and we challenge Rava again. So Tashma Kikara Shel Nachtam. We say in our Mishnah that when it comes to a baker's loaves that are all the same, because every baker wants to, market it based on taste, not on look. So as a result, they all look the same. Hooray, Elu Shelo. You get to keep it because everybody's is the same. So you're not going to be able to tell who it belongs to. Hashel Balabayas, but when it comes to a homemade loaf that everybody makes it in their own image, so to speak, Chayav Lahakris. So as a result, you have to announce it. So Shalbala bias my timer. What is the reason that you have to make it? You have to announce for the homeowners. Kavan to Isbahu Simon, because there's going to be some kind of identifying mark in that. Demei the Yadiyah, because it's going to be recognizable. Rifta de Inishu, because everybody bakes their bread in their own way. So below shna rishusa rabim, below shna rishusa yachid. And it doesn't seem, if we think about this through, right, it doesn't seem like we made any distinction between finding a baker's a home baker's bread in a public thoroughfare or a private thoroughfare. You have to note elomakris, you have to take it and announce it. Alma, doesn't that show? Don't we see simon ha'asr lidares havi simon, that a simon that is going to be trampled constitutes a remark? Oh, I'm sorry, tiyufta derabba. Oh, I'm sorry, this should have been I meant now that so we challenged Rava, then we challenged Rabba and Rava, and now we challenge Rabba alone. I got my order wrong. So we go from one to the other. And so isn't this a proof for Rava and a contradiction to Rabba? So no, it's not, because Amar Lach Rabba would tell you Hasam Hainu Taima. Here's the reason for the ruling over there. Mishum de ein mavirin al ha'ochlin. You don't pass by food. And so what does that mean? So Rashi helps us out. Second narrow line in Rashi. We're on Kaf Gimel Amud Aleph, 23a1. So Hamotzi Ochlin, so Ein Mavirin al Ha'ochlin, you don't pass over food. Hamotzi Ochlin B'derech. If you find food on the way, Ein Rishai La'avor Aleichem. You're not allowed to pass it by. You need to pick it up. Ulahanicham Sham, and to leave it there. Hilkach Lo Nidrasu. It will never be trampled. Shemishimatz on Rishon Higbihan. Whoever happens to find it first is going to lift it up. And so as a result, based on this halacha, and we'll see that there's a debate about it, but we do seem to paskin this way, that if you find, it has to, of course, be food. If you, I always think about, things that are bought, or for example, I've accidentally dropped one of the food bundles in the in the driveway, and it goes all over the place. So of course I have to clean it up. But the point is, it was rice. It was rice, and so as a result, it makes a big mess. But the point, it was white rice. But the bottom line is that I had to clean it up. Because of cleaning it up, it was no longer food once it was on the floor. No reasonable person would likely eat it, and so as a result, that wouldn't necessarily be obligated to lift it up for that reason, but you need to lift it up to clean it up. But the bottom line is that according to some opinions, you need to, if you pass food and it's good food, you should pick it up and not let it stay on the ground. So, but 1 second, how can Rabbah say that he doesn't have to worry about the trampling of a piece of bread, of a loaf of bread in the public thoroughfare? Well, aren't non-Jews, they don't have this mitzvah? Aren't they going to trample the food? So Nachrim Kaishi that the non-Jews, when it comes to a whole loaf, they're not going to want to step on it because they're going to be concerned about witchcraft, that somebody left it out and that there's some kind of magic associated with it. So therefore, they won't trample it. Well, what about animals? Animals don't care about this mitzvah to pick up things that have loaves of bread that are on the ground. We're talking about a place where there aren't too many animals walking around that are likely to step on it. So as a result, if in fact you were in a place where there were animals that were likely to step on the bread, well, then you wouldn't have to. Then, according to Rabbah, you wouldn't have to announce it, and the person would be able to keep it if they found it. So, okay. So Lema.
So what is the point with losing the food and trampling it? What's
So the point is remember the reason that Rabbah says that even if the small bundle has a sign on it, you don't have to return it, is because we're worried about trampling, and people are going to trample the wheat, the stalks that you have all bundled together, and then whatever sign you had on it is not going to be a valid sign. So, but on the other hand, when it comes to a loaf of bread, he says you cannot take it. You have to announce it, you have to announce it because the homemade bread has a sign on it, and so as a result, why are you, why this distinction between these two cases for Rabbah? It seems like he's being inconsistent, and so Rabbah explains that no, I'm being totally consistent. When it comes to the wheat bundle, people are going to trample it. But when it comes to food, you're not allowed to walk over food. You're not allowed to pass food on the ground. You have to pick it up. And so as a result, that's why it won't be trampled. And the person who picks it up will have an obligation to return it to the original owner. And so there's nothing inconsistent in Rabbah. And that's the answer. And then, well, second, though, the Gemara then asks, what about non-Jews and animals? So we explained non-Jews aren't going to trample the bread because they're worried about witchcraft, and animals aren't going to trample the bread because we're talking about a place where there aren't too many animals. And so that's why when it comes to homemade bread, which has a sign on it, which has marks indicating who made it, will require you to announce that it was sold. And when it comes to something else, when it comes to the small bundles of wheat, because people will trample it, we say that it is okay for you to just keep it, because we assume that the owner knows that he's never going to have it back, and so as a result, he's allowed to keep it. So that is the discussion, and so now we're going to try again this debate between Rabbah and Rava. Rabbah says, as we noted at the top, that even if the bundle has an identifying mark, it doesn't need to be returned because it's going to get trampled. And Rava says, no, even if the bundle has an identifying mark, even if it's going to be trampled, that still counts as a mark and you need to announce it. So now we're going to say that this debate, maybe it's a debate, this debate over Siman Ha'asoi Lidros, maybe that actually parallels a debate among Tanaim in our Mishnah. So Lema Kitanai, maybe we could say that this debate actually matches a debate of the Tanaim in our Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, as we said, Rabbi Yehuda says, Kol davar sheyesh bo shinoi, anything unusual, chayav lahakros, you have to announce it. So Kate said, and what is an example of an unusual thing? Matzah igol tocho cheres, if you find a round cake of pressed figs and there's pottery inside it, a piece of pottery in it, or kikar betocho maos, or if there's a loaf and there are coins inside it, Miklal, the Tanakama suffered. Doesn't this show that because there must be a debate with the Tanakama says, Hare Elu Shalo, that these belong to the finder, even if they have the shard. And now Svarua, let's see what the assumptions are. Dekule Alma, it must be that everybody says Siman Abame Elav Havi Siman, that an identifying mark that comes about on its own constitutes an identifying mark. umavirin al ochlin, and you are allowed to walk by food. So as a result, food could be trampled. So my love. So what's the assumption? And so as a result, what they're arguing about is a case of a sign that is going to be trampled. So in both cases, whether you're talking about the pressed figs or the loaf of bread, Mar Savar, the Tanakama says lo havi simon. It's not a good simon, and that's why somebody who finds it is allowed to take the item. Umar Savar havi simon, and the second Rabbi Yehuda says that it is a good simon, and that's why you're not allowed to take it and you have to announce it. So no, Amarav Zvid Mishmei de Rava, actually Isal Kadaitach Dekas Savar Tanakama Siman Ha'asul Daris Lo Havi Siman. Well, 1 second. If you're going to tell me that the Tanakama, who in our Mishnah we said it was Rebbe Meir, but the bottom line is it doesn't make a difference whether it's Rebbe Meir or an unnamed rabbis, but whoever it is, they say if they were to say that something that's going to be trampled is not a good simon, is not a good identifying mark, and umavirin ala Oakland, and you pass by food, kikaro shel balabayis, birshos harabim, amai machris. When it comes to the a homeowner's loaf of bread that's found in the public thoroughfare, why is that going to be announced? We are going to say in our next Mishnah that you have to announce that. So why do you need to announce that if in fact you are it's going to be trampled? And we say that something that's trampled is not a good simon. What's the difference between the loaf of bread made by a homeowner with compared to the small bundle of wheat? There's no difference between them. If the Tanakama says that you pass over, that one is allowed to pass over food and leave it on the ground. So that doesn't make any sense. So as a result, Rav Zvid offers his alternative explanation that fits everybody's opinion. Ella Amar Rav Zvid Mishmei de Rava. Rav Zvid explains, according to Rava, quoting Rava, Dekuli Alma Sabre, that really everybody, both the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda, agree. Simon ha'asik l'dares havi simon. A sign that is going to be trampled is a valid sign, which of course makes sense because that's what Rava's opinion is. Umavirin ala Oakland, and you pass by food. And what they're arguing about is really whether or not a sign that comes on its own is considered a good sign. The Tanakama savar siman abama elav lo havi siman. Rabbi Yehuda savar havi siman. That the Tanakama says that a sign that comes on its own is not a valid sign, and that's why you don't have to announce it. If you don't have to announce a piece of pottery that if a pressed figs have a piece of pottery in them, you don't have to announce it because presumably, Mark, they need your help. Because presumably the piece of pottery fell there by accident, and so we'll say that it fell there by accident, and therefore doesn't constitute. Have a good weekend. Doesn't constitute a good Shabbos. It doesn't constitute a identifying mark. And Rabbi Yehuda Savar Havi Simon. And Rabbi Yehuda says no. Even if something might have fallen there, and that might be the explanation, we're going to say that no, it didn't actually fall there. It was probably put there on purpose. But Rabba Amarlach, and now we can explain according to Rabba, right? According to the first way we understood this machlokus in our Mishnah, it all fits with Rava because Rava is the one who says that a siman ha'asur lidares havi siman. So now Rava says the kuli alma siman ha'asur lidares lo havi siman. Of course, Rava has everybody agree with him. The ein ma'avirin ala Oakland, and you don't pass by food. And again, they're arguing about the significance about whether or not a sign that comes on its own is a good sign. So they argue about the same thing, but the fundamentals, what they agree about, is completely opposite. So Tanakama Savar Lo Havi Simon, Rabbi Yehuda Amar Savar Havi Simon. So again, we have the same disagreement, but the result is but the fundamental parts that they agree about, Rabba and Rava would disagree, and Rabba would say everybody agrees with me, and Rava would say, of course, everybody agrees with me. Ikadamri. There are those who said that actually we never tried to bring this our Mishnah as a proof to the fact that Rabbah and Rava's debate was actually a debate in our Mishnah, but rather we thought that the debate in our Mishnah was something different. Ikadamri Savra Ruha, they thought that the Mishnah was debated about the following. Dekuli Alma Siman Habame Elav Havi Siman. Everybody thought that when it comes to a sign that comes out on its own, that would be a valid sign for Siman Ha'asur L'Daris Lo Havi Siman, and a siman that is coming to a sign that is going to be trampled is not a valid sign, meaning that it would be like Rabbah as opposed to Rabbah. So my lab b'ma'avirin al ha'ochlin kamiflagi, and what they're arguing about is really whether or not you're allowed to pass by food. Demar Savar, the first opinion says ma'avirin, you're allowed to pass by food, and that's why if you have pottery in a pressed figs, or you have money in a loaf of bread, it's not going to be a valid sign because it's going to get trampled because you don't have to pick it up. Umar Savar ain mavirin. And the other one says you're not allowed to pass by food on the ground. You can't just leave it there, and therefore it won't be trampled, and therefore the sign that of these things is a good sign. So Amar Rav Zid Mishmei de Rava, no, that doesn't work. Because Isal Kadayach Stavar Tanakama Siman Ha'asuk L'Daris Lo Abi Siman. Because if you were to say that a sign that's going to be trampled is not a valid sign, and you pass by food, again, why, when it comes to a homeowner's loaf of bread, do we have to announce it, as we will say in the next Mishnah? So it doesn't make any sense, because you're not supposed to, it should have been trampled, and therefore you should be able to keep it. Ella Amar Rav Zvid Mishmei de Rava. So again, Rav Zvid says the name of Rava, exactly as we said just 2 minutes ago. The Kuli Alma Sabri Siman Ha'asuk L'Daris Habi Siman. Really, everybody says that that a siman that's going to be trampled is a good siman. Umavirin al Oakland, and you pass by food. And they're arguing about a siman that comes on its own. The Tanakama Savar Siman Me'elav Lo Havi Siman, a siman that comes on its own is not a valid siman. But Rabbi Yehuda Savar Havi Siman, and Rabbi Yehuda says it is a good siman. But Rabba Amar Lach, and again, Rabba would say, no. That's the way Rabba would explain the Mishnah. But we would explain the Mishnah differently. Dekuli Alma, I would explain the Mishnah differently. Dekuli Alma Siman Ha'asu L'Daris Lo Havi Siman. Really, everybody agrees that a mark that's going to be trampled is not a good mark. But you don't pass by food. And that's why if you when it comes to a homeowner's loaf of bread, we're going to say that you have to announce it because there's got a sign in it and it's not going to be trampled. And everybody, and like we saw for Rabba also would say that they're arguing about a sign that comes on its own. Tanakama Savar Siman Abame Elav Lo Havi Siman, Rabbi Yehuda Savar Havi Siman, that the Tanakama says that it's not a good sign, and that's why you get to keep it, whereas Rabbi Yehuda says it is a good sign. And so let's take a quick look at the Tosos.
You were saying that they both agree on what they don't agree, right? They both agree.
Yes, that both Rabbah and Rava agree that our Mishnah is a debate about whether or not whether an identifying mark that comes on its own is considered an identifying mark. We'll explain what that means in just a moment. Yes, but I didn't find that actually useful. But if you find that useful, that's great. But
it's very confusing.
Yes, it is confusing because the disagreement between, well, remember two things. Rabbah and Rava are both Amoraim. And so as a result, they want as many Tanaim to agree with them as possible. So that's one background. The second is that it's clear that our Mishnah has a debate, and we need to know what that debate is about. And so the second thing to note is the fact that and so as a result, both Rabbah and Rava understand our Mishnah as being fundamentally consistent with their point of view. And then what's left to debate about? And what's left to debate about is this case of a mark that comes on its own. Now, Tosfos here helps us understand this whole concept a mark that comes on its own. So let's take a look at the last Tosos on Kaf Gimel Amud Aleph. Siman haba me'elav havi siman. A sign that comes on its own constitutes a real sign. So Perish Rashi. Rashi explains the l'shem siman natnu sham, that what it means that it's a good sign is that although the thing could have happened on its own, we're going to say that actually the person put it there. The lo nafal me'elav, and it didn't just fall on its own. The kasha, but it's difficult to understand because the ain derech latate ma'os bekikar. People don't put money in bread, in a loaf of bread, l'siman, as a sign. That's not something that's done. So it does seem to be that this sign fell there accidentally. Elayesh lomar de'imur yada shenaflu sham. We're talking about a situation where a person knows that the money fell into their dough and was baked into their dough. Uma'anda amar lo havi siman. So the point is that we're talking about something that could happen accidentally, but was known about. And the one who says that it's not going to be a good siman, even de regilos lavo me'elav, since sometimes it happens on its own, mistama lo yada, we're going to assume that he does not know about it. The kevan she'ain nikar b'chutz, because it's not obvious from the outside, right? If you have money on the inside of a loaf, that's the added point that until this point, I had assumed that the money was sort of sticking out of the loaf, or the pottery was sticking out of the wheel of pressed figs. And so, but no, he's saying that we're dealing with something where it fell inside, meaning during the pressing process or during the baking of the kneading process, the money fell inside, the coin fell inside, or the pottery fell inside, and that's where it was found. And so we're going to say that that's not going to be a good sign because it's not clear from the outside. Aval simani behema, but if you were to have an animal's sign, shehein ma'aleihen, of course, some kind of marking on an animal, like the side of a cow that happens to look like Mickey Mouse ears or something like that. Habi siman, that would be a good sign. So kevan shenikar, because it's obvious. V'chein davar she'ain nikar b'chutz, and similarly, something that's not obvious from the outside. Im ein regilos lavo me'elav, if it's not likely to come on its own, then havi siman. So, for example, if instead of a coin inside a piece of bread, you have, I don't know, you have something else that would be very unlikely to have fallen there. You have a little book or something. I don't know
but it's common. I think it's after Pesach. It's common people put a key in bread when they cook.
Yes, 100%. So that the key in bread, that concept of a key in bread, would not be of that. Well, the interesting question: if most people don't have keys that fall into bread, and so as a result, maybe it would be a good sign that bread is your bread. But when you have lots of people doing it at the same time, so then now the key doesn't become a sign any longer. So the bottom line is that all of these signs depend on the circumstances and the context. But I thought that this was an interesting. The idea is when you have something that could have happened on its own, do we allow that to serve as a siman? And what Tosfos is adding is that the question is it obvious from the outside? If it's obvious from the outside, we'll allow it to serve as a siman, because then we just assume that everybody knows about it. But when it's on the inside, we won't allow it to serve as a siman because maybe it happened there on its own.
When they're talking about the animals here, behemoth, for instance, the cattlemen would brand their cattle, right?
Yeah, of course, 100%. And that would be a valid siman. Now, a brand on a cattle is not something that came about on its own.
Right.
So that wouldn't be a siman haba me'elav. But it would be a totally valid siman. You're absolutely right. Okay, so now let's hear a couple of halachot that Amar Rav Zid, since we said Amar Rav Zid and Mishmei de Rava a couple of times already.
That's what Tosfos says. If it's for an animal, she ain't nikar b'chutz.
No. But remember, we're talking about a davar haba me'elav. That's something that came on its own. And so a brand on the outside of a cattle didn't come on its own. That's why I focused on the pattern of a cow.
But he says Ein regilo lavo me'alav have simon, right? He says in that case,
No. The ein regilos lavo me'elav is referring the chen davar she'ein nikar b'chutz, something that isn't obvious on the outside. If it's something, so again, for example, you find your phone in a loaf of bread. People will notice a phone in a loaf of bread. So clearly, if you put your phone in a loaf of bread to bake in the bread, that's going to be a good sign, even if it's not obvious from the outside. But you have a penny that happens to fall into a piece of bread, so then maybe you didn't notice it. So that's what that's referring to.
Uh-huh.
Okay, but that's a separate case from the case of, if we go back a couple of lines in that Tosos, right? So about simane behema shehein me'elehen, right? A sign on a behema that came about on its own. Havi simon kevin shenikar. That would be a valid sign because it is obvious, because it is clear from the outside.
Even if
Okay,
it came, so
and in fact,
Tosos
here, the Hagoza Bach adds the word bachutz. It's obvious from the outside, and then continues on. So he adds the word bachutz there.
even if it came about on its own, it's a
Even if
valid
it came
simon.
about on its own, but it's from the outside, then it's meaning that everybody can see it. That can serve as a sign, right? So the fact that an apple that I grew happened to have grown against another branch, so it's in this interesting pattern, that's a sign from the outside, and it would be a valid sign that I could say, hey, I know that's my apple. I lost an apple over here. I can give you a sign because it's shaped in this particular direction, because even though it happened on its own, that would be a valid sign. The point is that Tosfos is saying that when it comes to a siman haba me'elav, we're talking about a siman that's not obvious on the outside, money inside the loaf, which you then eventually find, and you're like, oh gosh, I guess I need to announce this, right? Because you eventually determine that it's that you've got this money on the inside of the loaf, and do you have to announce it, or do we say no, you don't have to announce it? That probably fell there by itself. And so as a result, it's not a good sign. And so what Tosfos is saying is that if it's something that could have fallen there by itself, then it won't be a good sign when you can't see it from the outside. Okay, so Amar Rav Zvid Mishmei de Rabba, Kaven de Amar, Vaila Lechesron Kiss. When one Akola de Avedasa, what's the rule for things that are lost? Kaven de Amar, Vaila Lechesron Kiss. Oi, I lost some money. Miyayish Lamina. That's an indication of a person giving up hope. So when you want to know, did somebody give up hope? Do they consider themselves to have lost the value of what the object was? V'amar azid mishmei de Rabba, another ruling. Hilchasa krichos bershus harabim. When it comes to the small bundles in public, harei elu shelo, the person gets to keep them. Bershus hayachid, and Rashi explains, kedemoki la b'she'ein bo simin. According to Rava, it's because there's no sign on the item. Birshos hayachid iderach nefila harei elu shelo. If when it comes to in a private domain, if it looks like they fell there, well then you can take them because presumably they fell there and the guy doesn't know where they fell. Iderach hanaka. But if he put them there, no dolmakos, then you need to announce it because he presumably put it there on purpose and has just forgotten that he put it there. And all of this is about where there's no siman on it. But when it does have an identifying mark, doesn't matter how it falls and whether it's in public or private. The point is if it's got a sign on it, you need to announce it. Okay, so the point is, okay. All right. So therefore, and that's so again, Rava is obviously paskening like Rava. So some people actually take out the word Mishmei de Rava here because it's really Rav Zvid paskening like. Okay. So now we had the next thing was Umacharozos as we turn to Kaf Gimel on the bed. Umacharozos Sheldagim. What if you find a string filled with fish? You can. So our Mishnah said that you get to take it. So Amai La'ebe Kesher Siman. Why not let the knots serve as the identifying mark. So Bekitra Detzaida, because everybody was using a fisherman's knot, the people who catch fish, they're not. Dekuli Alma Hachik Mikatri, and everybody ties in that way. So heavy minion simon, let the number of fish be the sign. The minyana deshavin, where we're talking about a situation where everybody uses the same number. As Rashi says, top Rashi Kaf Gimel Bet, Kvar Nahagu Hatzaidin, all the people who do the fishing and catch the fish, Lichros Kaminyan Hazeh Bichros Achad. They would tie this number of fish in one string. Okay, so all right, so that is that. So by mine mirav sheshes. So they asked Rav Sheshes, minyan havisimin, olo havisimin. We just hinted to the fact that maybe we could have the number of fish be a sign. Is it true that a number could be a sign? They asked Rav Sheshes. So Amar Lahu Rav Sheshes, Tanisua, listen, I'll show you that it can be. Matzah kol clay kesef. You find vessels of silver, or clay nekoshes, or a vessel of copper. Gasteron shel avar, or you got pieces of lead, b'chol clay matachot, or any kind of metal vessel. Harezeh lo yachzer, you don't have to return it. Now, that doesn't mean that you get to keep it. Ad sheyitain os, o ad sheyichaven mishkalosav. You until the person who claims it and says it's theirs, gives you a sign, or they tell you exactly how much it weighed. And from the fact that the weight is a sign, the dimensions and the number are also a good sign. Now, Tosfos asked an interesting question here. A second Tosfos and Kav Gimel on bet. When mashkal havi siman mida uminyan nami havi siman mashma demida adifa. It seems like from here that the measurements of an item are a better sign than the weight of an item. But Ve'im Tomer Ha'amrina, we're going to see in a couple of days, L'kaman Dav Kaf Chet Amud Aleph, Yinatin La'omer Mashkalo Sav. If you give an object to somebody who tells you its weight, the Lola Omer Midas Arko Birachbo, and not somebody who gives you the measurements of its length and width. Mashma de Mashkel Havi Simon Tvei. That implies that the weight is a better sign. Yesh Lomer Dahani Mili Bebeget. That when it comes to a piece of clothing, that's where the weight is going to be a better sign. The Ein Derech Lishkol Hasam Vadai so Vadai Mashkel Adam. So when because that's not something that often gets weighed, so as a result, that's where the weight is going to be better. And similarly here, when we say that if the weight works with respect to the vessels, so then certainly the number and measure is going to work, because that's going to be something that's less likely to be done. Okay, so next, chatikot shel basar. You have pieces of meat. Amai, why do you get to keep them? Lehevi mishkala siman. Let the weight be the sign. But mishkala deshavin. We're dealing with a place where all the wheat is of the same weight. Well, let the source, let the piece of meat, the nature of the meat, where it came from on the animal, be the sign. O de davka, o de atma, whether it came from the neck or whether it came from the thigh. So Milo Tanya. So why isn't that work? And moreover, Milo Tanya, don't we have the following ruling in a brisa? Dugim, if you find pieces of fish, vidag nashuch, or a fish that was bitten, chayav lahakros, you have to announce it. But chavios shel yayin v'shel shemen v'shel tvua v'shel grogros v'shel zaytim harei elu shelo. But if you find a keg of wine, oil, grain, dried figs, or olives, you get to keep them. So doesn't the found pieces of fish deal with the point that you found a piece from a particular part of the body of a fish, and therefore that's what is going to be the sign? No, that isn't the case. This is what that situation of the fish is talking about. B'de'ika simana b'paska. It's where the cut is what's clear. He had the Rabba Bar of Huna, like Rabba Bar of Huna. Machatech le atulasa karnasa. He would cut things into 3 corners. And you have to always do the Rashis that have pictures. So we'll go to the Rashi 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 12 lines down in the Rashi. Machtat machatach la atlas karnasa. He would cut it with 3 corners. Osa haftaticha. He would do the piece bas gimel kranos kazeh. He would have it have 3 corners like this, like the picture of a triangle. Dekanami, and indeed, you can make that diuk that this brisa is talking about the nature of the cut and not where it came from on the animal, because Dikatani Dumya de Dagnashach. The other case that's mentioned is a fish that had a bite taken out of it. So just as a bite, it creates a unique characteristic. Shma mina, we're talking about a cut in a unique characteristic. Okay. Um, yeah, we'll skip that. Okay. So Amar Mar Chavios Shel Yain. So what did we say in this price? So we said that when it comes to kegs of wine, Vishel Shemin, Vishel Tua, Vishel Grogros, Vishel Zaysim, Hare Elu Shalo, then whatever the material that's in the jug or barrel, you get to keep. V'hatanan Kedei Yain. But when it comes to a jug of wine, the Kadei Shemin and a jug of oil, Chayiv Lahakris, we're going to see in a Mishnah in a couple of days that in fact you have to announce those things. So why, when it comes to a jug, do you have to announce it? But when you come to a keg, you don't have to announce it. So Amar Rabbi Zera Amar Rav Masnisin Birashum, that the Mishnah is talking about with a container that was resealed, and so as a result, that that shows the seal on it will show the identification of who it belongs. Meklal de Baraisa bepatua. Oh, 1 second. So you're telling me that the Baraisa is dealing with something that's open, but ibe batuach aveda midasi. Why are you telling me anything about an open container? If you find an open container, that shows that a person clearly intended to lose it, because nobody would leave a wine keg open and unguarded, because they would know that, of course, all animals and bugs are going to fly into it. So the point is that if they know that they left it open, they're going to give up hope on it, and therefore you'd be able to take it. So Amar Rav Hoshia, and that wouldn't necessary. Why would we need to even teach that in a brisa? So Amar Rav Hoshia b'meitzim. No, we're talking about where it was found covered. So it wasn't sealed, but it was covered. Abaye Amar afilu tema idi v'idi barashim. You could even say that both of them were sealed and with a potential signatory seal, but below kasha. But there's no contradiction. Kan kodam sheniftechu ha'otzeros. One is a case where it's before the storehouse is opened. So as a result, the person who opened it and sealed it was almost certainly going to be the owner itself. And so the resealed item is going to have a personal indication of ownership. But when it's after the storehouse is opened, so then then all the seals are going to be, everything is going to be sealed. So you can't tell whether that by the nature of the seal whose it belongs to. So Kihada Rav Yaakov Bar Abba. It's like what the following ruling of Rav Yaakov Bar Abba. Ashka Chavisa Dechamra. They found a container of wine. La'achar sheniftechu ha'otros. After the wine store makers, the storehouses had opened. So Asala Kameda Abaye, and he brought it in front of Abaye. Amar Le, and Abaye said to him, Zil Shkol and Afshak, you get to keep it. You found it. It's already after everybody opened their wine. And so as a result, there's no way to distinguish this barrel of wine with its seal compared to everything else. So as a result, you're fine. You get to keep it. So by mine Rav Bivi Mirav Nachman, Makom Havisimon, Olo Havisimon. When it comes to a place, do we say it's a valid sign or a not valid sign? So Amrlay to Nisua, take a look at this brisa. Matzah Chavios Shel Yayin, Vishel Shemin, Vishel Tua, Vishel Grogos, Vishel Zaysim, Hare Elu Shalo, you get to keep it. Now, if you were to say that the where it got lost is a simon, lichros makom, let the person who found it announce the location. So Amar Rav Zind, Barata de Nahara. No, we're talking about where it was found at the port on the riverbank. So as a result, that's where, and you can't possibly have a sign in a place like that, because Amar Rav Mari highlighted my time of Amar Rabbanan Raksat Nahar Lo Havisim. Why is a riverbank not considered a good sign for identifying something belonging to you? Damrinalei, because we tell the person who's trying to say that it's theirs, it's remei l'didach, like it happened to you, it's remei nami l'chavra. Maybe it happened to somebody else. Lots of people have goods on the riverbank, and so as a result, you can't tell whether it's your thing there. Ikadamri, and there are people who phrase it slightly differently. Amar Rav Mari, my time Amar Rabbanan Makam Lo Havi Simon Damrinan like Ki Hekid is Remi Lididach High Makam. That since it happened to you in this place, it's Remi Nami Lakavraka High Makam. Maybe it happened to another person in this place. Meaning, even if you were to put it down in this specific space, this was nice place for you. It was a nice place for them also. Okay, so Ahu Gabra the Ashka Kufra. So a person found some tar, some pitch, Bema Atzarta, in a wine press, presumably because the pitch in the wine press might be useful to line your the outside of the barrels to make sure that they don't leak. Asala Kameh de Rab, and he came before Rab. Amrle Zilsh Kol Lanashach. You can take it. There's nothing identifiable on this pitch, and so as a result, it's yours. But Rav could see that the person was a little bit worried about taking it. So Amarle, he said to him, "Listen, Zil plog lechia bare mine. You can even give some of it to my son Chia if you want. Meaning, I am confident that this does not belong to anybody else. And of course, he doesn't want to take it for himself because that would look very inappropriate. Lema kasavar Rav doesn't. So we're going to see that Rav says makom lo havi siman. Doesn't this show that a place doesn't constitute a sign of a particular location of an identifying mark? Because after all, if the person found it in a wine press, so maybe he should identify that as the location. So Rabbi Abba, Mishum Yesh Balam Naguba. It was clear in this context that the owner had given up. Because he saw that weeds had grown on whatever the container was that had the pitch on it. So the point is it had been there for a long time. So as a result, we know that in fact it was in fact lost, and that hope had been given up in connection with the item. So all right, so I didn't scroll for the end. I apologize. So I'm going to scroll a little bit here as we go through. So we'll end there, and so now we're going to the next topic that we're going to have is we're almost done analyzing our opening Mishnah of the second chapter of Metzia. So stay tuned for tomorrow's daf as we'll finish up with the last part of the Mishnah and Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar's statement about what an anporia is. So if you want to know what an anporia is, stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. Have a great day, everybody.
Have a great day, great Shabbos, Fredach Purim.
Amen. Amen.
And I'll have to do a different daf tomorrow because obviously I'm nowhere near Riverdale.
Yeah, we'll miss you. Have a good day. Have a good Shabbos.
I'll do Rabbi Stefanski.
Okay, sounds good. Be well.